the welcome slide. Good job. Thanks, Tracy. Okay, so we might kick off. Just mindful of the fact that people that have jumped in online on time, we don't want to obviously take away from your evening, and thank you very much for attending. So we've run this session earlier today, and then we're also obviously running it this evening. So it's a practice manager masterclass, and it's to discuss change management. I'd like to start today by making an acknowledgement to country. I'm meeting today on the ancestral lands of Gunai-Kurnai people. I recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community and respect their cultural heritage and beliefs. I would also like to extend my respect to the elders of the community and recognition of their descendants who are present here today. I'm your host for this evening. My name is Michelle Baxter. I'm a Program Delivery Officer and support GP practices across the Latrobe and Baw Baw regions. I do have a practice management background, so I understand the challenges and also the highlights of your days. So I'm more than happy to be hosting this evening and hope that you get a lot out of tonight's presentation from Jen. So today, Jen Flagmore is our presenter. Jen has more than 20 years experience in practice management. So we're very lucky to have Jen in the room. And she's also, she currently works as a business manager for a general practice clinic, offering consultancy to general practice and allied health, and also runs a general practice new manager program, which is fantastic because we've got quite a few new managers across Gippsland. So they might be keen to sort of reach out and ask a few questions, which would be great. Jen has also lectured in professional practice in Melbourne and taught Diploma of Leadership and Management in at Geelong TAFE. Jen has a Bachelor of Arts with a double major in psychology, Diploma in Business Management, Diploma in Human Resources, and a certificate in Training and Assessment, and is also certified practice manager with the Fellow of Australian Association of Practice Managers, so AAPN. So thank you. There will be opportunities throughout the evening. We'll probably encourage you just to pop your questions or any queries or comments that you have in our chat panel of this evening's session. And we also will be sending out a survey link post this evening's session. Once we receive that survey from you, then we'll actually provide a statement of your attendance. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to Jen.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, we'll just get ourselves up and running. Just bear with us for a moment. Okay, past, excellent. All right, so I'm hoping you can see a screen with change management on the front of it.
Yep.
Fantastic, okay. So thank you very much for inviting me along and to a nice, I don't know what it's like down your way, but it is freezing here in Geelong. So I really appreciate that you came out tonight and as we go through and have a look at change management. So it's what it means. We're talking about change management and what it means for us, for practice managers. So we've gone through a lot of changes in the last 4 years in particular, and general practice will continue to innovate, adapt and change. So we're the people who hold the responsibility for that change success, and today we're going to look at how we do that best. So there's a couple of things, nothing very serious, that if you've got a pen and paper, we will need that going forward. not to take notes, you'll get a copy of the slides. And if you want to email me about particular questions at any time, feel free to do that. So, okay, we shall get started. All right, so Fluffy Bunny Healthcare story. So basically, I talked to a number of practices over the last 4 years about how they manage change, how their teams manage change, how they manage the implementation process, people's reactions to change. And then when I was invited to come along to run this workshop, this webinar, I went back to them and asked them if we could use some of their stories. So they've all consented to that. So basically, I've amalgamated all of those clinics into one super clinic, which we're going to call Fluffy Bunny Healthcare. And the practice managers have all been amalgamated into the FB manager. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a look at understanding change and how we respond to change and the implementation of change. So how we plan for change, which is about getting that proposal right so we get our stakeholders on board. We're going to talk about identifying and overcoming resistance, because that's a key component of change. How do we make change happen? Getting positive engagement of stakeholders, so getting all of our stakeholders on board. And then looking at the implementation process, what we need to get it all happening, looking at monitoring, reviewing, and also risk assessment. And then we're going to look at why change fails or succeeds and how we're going to increase our chances of success. So that's our plan for this evening, and we shall get our move on. So first thing we're going to look at, understanding change. It actually covers a few areas. We firstly have to understand how we feel about change, how our teams feel about change, how we react to change, and then understand the exact nature of the change itself. So understanding change comes on 2 levels. So again, doing some research, talked to those wonderful practice managers at Fluffy Bunny, came up with the following reactions to change from them and also from the members within their practices. So we've got, and some of these may resonate with you, denial, fear, anxiety, frustration, loss of control, uncertainty, uncomfortable, and just plain exhaustion. And then on the other side of it, we also had excitement, confidence, relief that a change was finally happening, a challenge, moving forward, and just another day at the office. So I'm sure some of those resonate with me, and I'm sure some of those resonate with you and your teams. So what I'd like you to have a think about is, how do you actually react to change? So you personally, think about a change you've been involved in recently. How did you feel when you were looking at that change, when you were the implementation process, and how you actually reacted yourself to the forthcoming change. So it's important for us to kind of understand how we deal with things as well. Not all change is good or bad, and how we react to change may vary depending on what it is. So the Fluffy Bunny manager was confident about a change involving the move to online bookings, but was very anxious about a change involving extending clinic hours. So because she had understood how that was going to affect her team, and so any change can be, depending on the nature of the change and what it's going to be within your clinic and who it's going to affect, will vary your reaction to it. So, but understanding when you're faced with change, understanding your emotional reaction to it or your intellectual reaction to it, and your teams will actually help you implement change in an easier way. So when we're looking at when we think about our reaction, then we look at the change itself. So the easiest way I find to work out, to look at change is actually think about the why, the where, the what, how, who, when. If you cover those, you've got a really good plan in place for implementing your change. So when we look at Fluffy Bunny, as an example, they implemented online bookings. So what they were looking at, so if we go through the why, where, what, how, when, who, when with Fluffy Bunny. So why is the change happening? Are they absolutely certain it's necessary? Is it driven internally or externally? Do we have control? So yes, we have control. This is our decision. This is the change we're making. Why are we doing it? In their case, it was patient demand. Patients wanted to be able to book an appointment online whenever they felt like it, as opposed to trying to make a call, being on hold, and trying to get through. So that was the first why. The second one was because other clinics were doing it and Fluffy Bunny felt that they were being left behind and not giving the best service to their patients. And the third reason for them was that reception were under the pump with calls. So they were trying to, so for the whys for them were pretty compelling, that they wanted to implement the online bookings. So for them, so where might be a location, but it's also, where is also about where are we now and where do we need to be when change is successful. So their where is pretty simple. They have no online bookings, they're going to have online bookings. They wanted to have them for standard consultations and telehealth only. So the next one is what's going to happen? Pretty basic. Fluffy Bunny bookings open for patients. How will it happen? This is about the steps to get there. So they got there. They got there.
Good. Thanks, mate. Thanks for calling back. Russell, yes, this is first time that I'm going.
I'm sorry, I seem to be competing.
Yeah. Hang on a second.
I think we're right to go. Yep, okay. How will it happen? So it's about the steps to get there. So meeting with providers, communicating with patients, communicating with the team, marketing, education, setting up the parameters of their bookings, working out, then going to the who, which doctors are going to be involved. Some doctors didn't want to be involved with the process. They wanted to keep to their phone bookings. Some didn't want new patients to book online, some did. So it's about, they had to work out who it would be, who it would involve, how it would affect them and how they will react. So we're talking about patients, doctors, support staff, the booking system teams, so the software people, and getting everyone and working out who in order to work out what we were going to do with them. And then when will it take place? So need to have a timeline for implementation and to start. Things that don't have a definite date tend not to happen. So they decided it was going to take them a couple of months to get things up and running. So they said from the 21st of June, we start the implementation process. We start planning, putting things into place. We are going to be open for online bookings on the 1st of September. So that was their basis of how they were going to start their plan. So what we'll look at all of these things in a bit more detail. But first of all, what I want you to have a look at is to have a think about that change isn't always easy for people. We know that. And it's more difficult if it's forced upon us and we don't understand why. So what I'd like you to do, and if you can do this, I can't see you, but I'm hoping you'll do it, that like Anika here, what I'd like you to do is to cross your arms. So some of those of you will be familiar with this, but it's the easiest way to explain the challenge of change. So crossing your arms. Now what I want you to do is to cross them the other way, which I can't do very well. We're crossed. Okay, so how does that make you feel? So it's an uncomfortable kind of bit weird thing, isn't it? And the first thing that you may have thought of is, why are we doing this? So what we need to take from this is such a simple thing that has no actual value, long-term consequences, but it's something that we generally do one way, and now we're being asked to do it another way. So imagine how difficult it must become for people who have done the same thing, perhaps since they've started work at your clinic and been there for years, and we ask them to do it differently, and we ask them to do it permanently. So this is the first step in understanding change management, is to understand our team and how they are likely to react, and we need to empathise with them. So the first take home tonight is that if you're finding the process frustrating, and we do, because we want to implement change and we have resistance or hold-ups or whatever, what I want you to do is just to remember to walk away, to cross your arms, cross them the other way, and just stop, reset, and have a think about the difficulties that it is for people and associated with change. Okay, so we're going to talk about resistance and overcoming resistance a little later on. So for now, what we're going to look at is planning for change and getting that proposal right. So the most common question you'll be asked when we start talking about changes is why. So we need to be able to answer that. So if we go back to Fluffy Bunny healthcare, in the COVID days, which is the early days of COVID, was fortunately a distant memory now, but I'm sure it all comes back to us. So we were getting, the government were letting us know, sometimes by the 9 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, but they were letting us know that things were changing. So we had to wear masks, we had social distancing, we had distancing within our practices, we had to put signs up saying capacity of 14 people in the waiting room. We had hand sanitizers, so things were changing all the time. We had to update our COVID safe plans. So what we were basically doing is implementing change because the government said so. Now, Fluffy Bunny thought about this and thought, this is going to be a difficult kind of procedure. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to make it more compelling for their people. So rather than kind of the equivalent of a parental because I said so. So what they did was they said that the government says so. However, why we're doing it because we have to, but the reasons why we're doing it is to keep our people safe, keep our patients safe, keep our staff safe, keep our doctors safe. And the government says that this is the best way that we can do it. So that's why we're getting on board with this. And it made it much easier for them to get the team to roll with change after change going through that time. So really important to make the why specific to the people that are in your team. So what we also want to have a look at is, as I'm saying, we need to get a compelling case for change. So this is looking at the reasons for the change and also looking at the reasons against the change, the reason to remain in the status quo. The reason that we do that is because we are going to get people come to us and say, we shouldn't be doing this because, and giving you all the reasons against it. If we've already thought about those reasons that people are going to come up with, we can then give our logical, reasonable responses to that. So we've thought about it. We're not just being reactive. We've actually proactively thought about what the issues could be and worked out solutions for them, or worked out how we can basically negotiate through those issues to move forward with the change. So one of the examples is Fluffy Bunny hadn't been charging for treatment room fees, and they decided to finally bring in fees. So it was a compelling argument for management. The treatment room was basically hemorrhaging money, and as supplies were going up and becoming harder to get, then it became a bit of a no-brainer for them. They really had to pass some of those costs on to the patients. So it was a compelling case for management. However, it was not a compelling case for doctors, nurses or reception staff. The doctors could see no value in it because it wasn't adding to their value. The money was going straight to the treatment, to the practice. So it wasn't impacting them personally, except for the fact that they had to, patients would be talking to them about it and saying, well, you know, then they weren't happy about it. So doctors, not on board. Nurses, reception staff, they knew that they were going to bear the brunt of the complaints, and they couldn't see why the practice just couldn't continue on swallowing those costs the same as it had done all of this time. So what the manager did is they sat them all down and said, got everyone together and said, look, we want to explain this to you, so in ways that kind of make it a bit clearer. So they talked about the costs of consumables for dressings over the period of 12-month time, and actually told them how much money that was not being reimbursed by anyone. And then they talked about what they could do, what they needed to do with that money. Now, what they needed to do was they needed new equipment. They needed a new vaccine fridge. Really, that was definitely on the cards. They also needed, you know, more training and education for staff. They wanted to have better quality consumables, which they felt would lead to better quality patient outcomes. So they were able to look at the situation, look at the change, and bring forward a compelling case for the nurses, doctors and the reception staff, and we're able to get them on board in a much easier fashion than if they had have just left it at, we need to save money. So does that make sense to people? Good. I can see you nodding. All right. So we'll get resistance to change, and that's okay. We actually want people to think about the downside of changes that we're going to implement, because we need to be thinking about risk management and making sure that we consider these things in our risk management plan, and will give us a better chance of success. So looking at the reasons for and against, build that compelling case. There has to be, in order for a change to move forward effectively, there needs to be a dissatisfaction with the current way of doing things. So when you're looking at implementing your change, the why needs to include, because whatever's happening now is not as good as it could be. So looking at the reasons that things may be dissatisfying for people, that they're not happy about, and bringing them into your compelling case. As practice managers, we have to embrace the change. If we don't, we can't easily get people on board. A lot of the changes that we've had to do in the past few years have been forced upon us. And so, like Fluffy Bunny, we've basically had to turn around and implement them with enthusiasm, and that it's going to be better for our practice, because that was the best way of moving forward. Change must be attractive. So not just the end goal, but the process itself. So if we can look at small changes as we move along, if we've got people who get to that sort of first phase, or they've done a task that was instrumental in moving forward to the change, what we want to do is we want to recognise and acknowledge the fact that we've got that far. So what that does is that encourages people. We're positively reinforcing good behaviour, the same as we do all the time. So what we want people to do is to feel that there's it's good. They will feel better if they actually move forward in this change and they become more used to it, and then they're happier to do the next change that comes along. And we try and satisfy the needs of those people who are involved. So with this, it's about looking at you know, the implementing online bookings. So the needs of the reception staff to have less calls, to be less inundated, and the needs of patients to be able to look at it and go, yep, fantastic, I can finally book an appointment when I need to. I don't have to wait for the next day to ring. Okay, so that's all about getting that proposal right. But what we do find, as we've talked about, is resistance. So there's going to be resistance, and that's fine, as we've talked about. That's human nature. So what we need to think about is that there's kind of 3 levels of resistance. So there's resisting the idea. So this is basically people saying, that's a silly idea. The idea won't work. Then we have a secondary level of resistance that's due to deeper emotional issues. So this is, people don't like the idea, but they're fearful of what may come out of it. So they're fearful that they may lose, you know, hours, you know, they may not understand what's going to happen. They may not be as good at the new process as they were at the last one. So they can be angry or hostile or upset. So that's that deeper emotional level. And then you get like a deeply embedded resistance. I hope you haven't had to deal with too many of these, but you probably have come across it before. So this is people who, it's basically, if you say, what colour's that? That colour's white, they will say it's black every single time. So this level is people who often, they just don't want to be there. They don't like their job. You know, they may not like you as the boss. They don't like the organisation. So they are not going to get on board without a fight. Now, the thing about this one is that they may love the idea and they may feel it will be a real benefit, but they will resist it with their dying breath. So what I'd like you to know is, does this resonate with people? Like, have you come across these levels of resistance before? Anyone? I'm assuming that you probably have. So have we got any questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say, are you happy for people just to unmute, Jen, and
provide
that feedback? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Look, so what we'll do...
I think we're all being polite.
You are all being polite. That's good. Look, what we'll do is what I want you to do is, because we shouldn't be like sitting down all night, but for this particular thing, what I would like you to do is I want you to stand up, turn around with your back to the screen. Like really, that is what I want you to do. To stand up, turn around, or if you happen to be sitting in a wheelie chair like this one, spin around with your back to the screen. And then I want you to spin back round again. Or turn back round again and face the screen. So what was the emotional response to being asked? What are the thoughts that occurred to you? Probably why? This is silly. I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to do it. She's lost her mind. Any of those things may have occurred to you. So what that brings home is that resistance is almost automatic if we don't understand change. We are wired to want to understand before we commit. But there's lots of reasons people resist. And to combat resistance, we need to understand it. So if people would like to share with us, why do people resist change, do you think? What are the reasons that you've come across that they have resisted change? Anyone?
Got someone typing.
Excellent.
Julep is typing, so we'll wait for.
It's awful. Then the pressure's on you to type really fast.
I know. You did very well. So they think that it's very difficult.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So they're looking at it and thinking it's just too hard.
There's also Warrigal family have mentioned that too comfortable in the current situation.
Yes, that's a really good one as well. They know what they're doing. They're comfortable. They can often be considered experts, perhaps, because they're the people that if there's not too sure about what to do with the batching. Check with Mary over there. She's the expert. So they become comfortable in what they're doing. It's a routine. We don't like to change routines. And so they will be resistant. Have we got any others?
Yes, Julep again has mentioned fear for new technology.
Yes, fear of the unknown. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a pretty common one as well. And we can all understand that, but it's not going to make our change any easier, is it? Do we have any more?
No, that's it for now.
Beautiful. So thank you for that. So what we've also got is it could be too much too soon. So we may have been doing change after change after change, and people just go, I can't do it anymore. They fear loss of face if they, as we're talking about. They don't understand why the change is necessary, so we haven't made that compelling case for them as yet. If they've got an emotional connection to the status quo, so people who, for example, may have set up a process or a system, and when we're changing that process or system, it's almost like a personal attack upon them because they're the ones that set it up. So we can get resistance from that. They don't believe the change will be managed correctly. So either through lack of resources or lack of competence. There may be a history, and it may not have been you as the manager, it may have been previous managers, that change has not been managed well, and they believe that that's what's going to happen in the future because that's the experience that they've had in the past. Sometimes they can see it as a fad, that we'll change this, there'll be something new in another few weeks, so why bother? They haven't been informed of why the change is necessary, and they haven't been asked for their input, even though it affects them directly. So if we're not asking them, then they're saying, well, I don't care. You didn't ask me for my opinion, so I'm not going to get on board with this. And sometimes the benefits don't seem to match the effort. So it seems to them like there's going to be an enormous amount of work, an enormous amount of disruption for what? They can't see the benefit to them. And that's one of the things that we have to explain to them. Sometimes they just feel like the fear thing. They just feel they'll be worse off. They feel their hours will be cut. They won't understand what they have to do. They'll be made to look foolish. So there's lots of reasons for resistance, and it comes from those three levels. And what we need to do is we need to understand what those general reasons are for resistance so we can then combat them. So how do we overcome resistance? What have you used in the past in order to overcome resistance? I'll just have a sip of water while you're doing that.
Once again, happy for you to take yourself off mute and just have a bit of a chat.
I know, it's late and it's the end of the day. You're tired.
Yeah.
That's okay. All right, so how we overcome resistance? So what we need to do, so it's about that compelling case. It's about our preparation. So Fluffy Bunny, when they were implementing changes, what they would do is that they would have meetings where everyone was allowed to voice their concerns. And no judgment, no blame, everyone was allowed to voice their concerns. They had options for sending emails or for having a one-on-one if people didn't want to voice their concerns within a group. And then the managers would then come back with responses to each of those concerns. If they couldn't do it at the time, if they had to go and research more or ask questions or whatever, that's what they did. But they came back and they answered every single question. So this was about that communication and collaboration. What they also did was they broke things down. So people are often resistant to that, to the, like we're going to implement online bookings. Oh, it's going to be a disaster. So what they did is they broke it down into little bite-sized things. So yes, we're going to, our main goal is to implement online bookings. But what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to do this, this and this. So we're going to get everyone to have lots of education and training based around what they will need to do in their role when we have the online bookings. We want you to ask lots of questions. We'll get all the training that you need. And when you're satisfied that you know what you're doing, then we'll move on. So it's about breaking things down into things that are palatable for people. So they're not expected to take on a huge chunk at once. They're just expected to get through this little bit first. And then when they did that, they were encouraged. So, there was a recognition that they had achieved something, and that was great. They had worked towards that plan, and that was fantastic. And then people will find it easier to do it again, to take that small step and to be involved because they were appreciated for what they did. And as we know, that's really key in when we're dealing with our teams. And for you, it's about remaining positive and supportive to get your team on board. And think about what your culture is actually like and whether your culture embraces change and embraces that opportunity for people to be involved in the process, to voice their concerns and their opinions, knowing that they will be heard and that they will be dealt with. So it's sometimes we have to look within our culture to see if it works in order to minimise the chances of resistance. And worst case scenario, we have to performance manage. Sometimes if we get those deeply embedded resistance where people don't like their job and they will be as difficult as possible about it, then sometimes we just have to performance manage them. If someone refuses to do a particular process, that's what it may come down to. If we've tried everything else, that's what it may come down to. Does that make sense to everyone? Are we nodding? Any questions? All good for questions? Cool. Okay, so talking about the communication. So never underestimate the power of it. So this was a quote from the Fluffy Bunny manager. So the less our team know about the how, the what, the when, the where and the why, the more they imagine and make up for themselves. This is when change becomes challenge. So I don't know if any of you have ever played that game, the Chinese Whispers, I think they used to call it, where you'd have people lining up and I whisper something to you and you kind of half hear it and then you fill in the bits you didn't hear and you pass it on to the next person, but it'll be a slightly altered version. So do we understand that? Yeah. Okay. So now Fluffy Bunny were deciding to change their opening hours. They were extending their opening hours. So the rumour of this increased opening hours went around the practice like wildfire. And in a very short space of time, they had very unhappy reception staff who were becoming increasingly angry at the fact that they would all be put on a rotating Monday to Friday evening shift that finished at 9 p.m. So justifiably angry. However, the truth was that the reality was a Monday and Wednesday evening only, finishing at 7 p.m. If any of the current staff didn't choose to do it, they were going to look at hiring a university student to get in. Now, the problem, of course, became that the amount of resistance was very high. The morale plummeted, and it took a whole lot longer to sort out than really needed. And that's when it really became a challenge. So communicating with your team and getting their input is absolutely critical. Even though we may sit there and know that this is the direction we have to go and this is how we're going to do it, we still have to make sure that we communicate with people and that we get them involved. This is how we get a positive engagement of our stakeholders, that they feel that they're being listened to, they're being heard, and that they're able to contribute to where the change is going. All right. So then we talked about the why. We're going to talk about the where. So when we're putting all of this together, people need to know where we're going and where we want to be. What does finished look like? So change is moving from where we are now to where we want to be, or where we have to be. To do that, we create a common vision. So remember, the fear of the unknown leads to the rumour mill, but it also leads to resistance. So we want to positively engage our teams in sharing the vision of what we want to accomplish. So to do this, we have to firstly explain the necessity of change. Explain why that is happening, why we have to do it this way. Talk about what the change is expected to achieve. What do we hope will happen? Not just that we're going to have online bookings, but that, you know, there will be more time for reception staff, there'll be less calls, more time for reception staff to catch up on those admin-y things that they never get to at the end of the day, and that you know, makes them stressed. And then we want to, you know, we establish goals that are realistic, achievable. And remember, we talked about those bite-sized goals that people can feel that they can get to. They can do that. They might not be able to do the whole thing in one leap, but they can do those little bits. They're happy to be on board with that. We have to talk about how people will be affected. Now, this is for the good or sometimes for the bad. Sometimes we've had to make decisions that may have involved in people having hours cut, or doing, you know, tasks that they may not enjoy as much as other parts of their work. So we need to make sure that we're honest and transparent with people about what those changes are going to be, and then they can consider what their options are. Communicate, collaborate, which we've talked about. Adapting to good ideas. So this is about that collaboration, but this is making sure that when good ideas come in, and we've got this kind of idea of the plan, when good ideas come in, that we can adapt our plan to include them. So not only do we get a better plan, but we get the positive engagement. We get people saying, well, I am important to this process because they've listened to me, they've heard what I've said, and they've said that's a great idea. So this is how we adapt our plan if we need to, because it's going to be better. And then we keep people moving forward. So this is, you know, we keep people moving forward by that positive encouragement, and by, you know, continue to communicate and continuing to get their input as we move along. And this is how we keep people moving forward. because resistance doesn't just happen at the start of a change, it can happen anywhere along the process. Keep that in mind and just remember that we deal with these things as we go along. Okay. So, no questions at the moment? All good?
No, nothing in the chat.
Okay, no problem. All right, so next what we come to is actually making that plan. So this is where we start looking at the logistics of change. So what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, who will be involved, and when it will happen. So Fluffy Bunny, and then move to treatment room billings. So what's going to happen? Well, patients are going to be charged for consumables. Think about all the steps in between, and that's the how. How much of the treatment billings going to be? What are the treatment room billings going to be called? Are they going to be treatment room A, consumable B? What will the prices be? So there's lots of little steps in what and how it's going to happen. And then, you know, how will you let patients know? So information on the website, handouts, signage, but then who will be involved? So who's going to update the website? Who's going to write the handouts? Who's going to update the feeds? And then we look at when. When will the start date be? When will you start letting people know? So if you make a plan, what I would always recommend is when you plan for change, sit down with the people involved, brainstorm all the steps you need to make that change happen. When we were, my clinic, when we decided to do the COVID vaccination clinics, we sat down with the team. We had meters and meters of butcher's paper, packets of texters, sticky notes everywhere. We had we had the doctors that were going to be involved. We had the reception, the nurses, management, admin, all involved in working out all the steps of the process, how it was going to work, what we needed to do, when we were going to do it, how we had to include all the government requirements, if you remember all of those. So we all got together and we did this plan. And at the end of it, so we planned it, we planned it out what we thought was as good as we could possibly do. First day of the clinic, of the vaccination clinic, we were doing 150 vaccines, and it was, I think I got there at, the clinic was at 8:30. I think I got there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and about 10 minutes later, my practice principal waltzed in, and then by 7:30, the whole team were there getting ready to go. So we started at 8:30. At 10 to 9, practice principal and I were sitting out the front, drinking coffee, inviting everyone into our brand new vaccination clinic because it was going smoothly. Nothing went wrong. It was as if we had left nothing to chance. I think we had problems eventually, but in those first few weeks, everything was perfect. So the benefits of getting your team involved and having those big sessions where you just try and nut out every conceivable thing. So that's about making that plan, getting your logistics right, and that way you've got a really good chance of success. All right, so what we need to do, we're moving on, we've got the implementation phase. So what you need to do is you need to have a clear timeline to start and to finish. So actually pick a day for the change to begin. So, okay, from next Tuesday, we are going to start the process. We're going to have a meeting. We're going to work out what we're going to do, we're going to allocate some tasks, and then we're going to work out how long we're going to give those tasks to be completed. We're going to put some time frames in there. And then we're going to pick a day to begin with. So 1st of September, we're going to start charging for treatment room bookings. So we then have to look at a risk assessment. So thinking about the change and what other areas it might impact. So it's about that, being aware of that ripple effect as well. So we know that when we change one aspect or one process, one system, because things are interrelated, we can affect something else. So we need to have a look at what will be likely be impacted and whether we're happy to take the risk on that or whether we can do something about it beforehand. So again, Fluffy Bunny with their online bookings. So they thought about what the risks might be. So one of them was that the doctors were concerned about patients, particular patients that for whatever reason had been flagged not to see those individual doctors. So they were concerned that the patients would be able to book online with them, whereas before they would ring and reception would always just give them another GP. So that was a risk. But when they looked at the risk, they realised that the online booking system had a facility to basically flag patients who would be unable to book online. They would be given the message that they needed to. They were unable to book the appointment. They would need to call reception. So they were able to completely get rid of that risk altogether. There was also the concern about the risk of patients who are unable to book online. Well, they could still call. So they needed to make it really clear that this was just an option for people to make an appointment. You can book online or you can still call the practice. So that risk was also got rid of altogether. So it's important to look at the risks and to be able to manage them. Sometimes you may come across something that the risk is so great for a particular area within your practice that you either modify the plan or you change it altogether or you get rid of it. So taking into account those risk factors, again, really important, because if you look at that at the start as much as you possibly can, then the chances of you being able to get to where you want to be are much higher because you've already factored in all of those issues that might get in your way as much as you possibly can. Fluffy Bunny had an admin staff member who would look at all these changes, would think about things, and then would always come back with, "My only concern is." Now, the thing about that was that they often identified problems that no one else saw, which was fantastic. So never dismiss people's concerns without assessing the risk behind them and without giving them the knowledge that they need to be reassured that, okay, that risk is actually not going to be a factor. Next, what we need to do, so doing a skills analysis. So most of you have done this before in some size, shape or form. So what you're doing is you're looking at your team, you're looking at the who will be involved, and working out what level of training they need. Some people will need a greater level of training, perhaps around IT, for example, than other people. So it's not a one size fits all in regard to training and education around change, because dependent on the change will depend on, and the skills analysis will depend on where you need to direct more training, or where people can even basically just work it, not work it out themselves, but do some self-education on it. And then we're looking at assigning tasks and resources. So this is actually assigning tasks is just a process of looking at all of the things that needed to be done after your brainstorming activity, and then working out who's going to do what. So you as practice manager cannot do it all. So it's about you working out what you can either delegate from the change plan or what you can delegate from your role in order for you to be able to spend more time on this change. So, you know, you may say, okay, I need to train someone else up in fixing the batching mistakes because that's time consuming, and I need to spend time, I need to allocate my time towards these aspects of the change process. Assigning resources can be a little bit more problematic because often there is the expectation that we will implement change with no additional resources of financial or time. And that kind of doesn't work well, as we all know. What it usually means is that instead of sitting here watching this webinar, you're still back at the office because you've been implementing parts of the change process, but you haven't got any additional assistance, so you're now trying to do the rest of your job at 6:30 at night. So this is where your compelling case, when you're doing your compelling case and you're putting all the steps together, the people who make the decisions about resources, they need to be fully informed, and you need to go over it with them and say, this is how it will work best. These are the resources that we're going to have in order to implement it. Understand that you'll need to provide support. So you are the practice leader, one of the practice leaders. So you're going to have to support people who are unsure, they have questions, they have concerns, they've got partway through it and got a bit worried about things. So you're going to have to, as well as doing your own job and implementing the change, you're also going to have to provide some support for them. So you're going to have to allocate that resource of you as well. Adapt when necessary. Again, good ideas come on board, adapt. You hit a roadblock that is immovable, work a way around it, adapt to the situation as you go along. Don't be so in love with the plan that you've carefully concocted with your team that you can't look at it and go, you know what, that is not going to work so well. Make sure you can put some change in there. Celebrate successes. As we said before, make sure that there's some way of doing it. If you can either, you can do the smaller celebrations as you go along. If there's something that's considerably achieved, for example, the day that your online bookings are up and running, if you run morning teas or pizza at lunch or whatever it might be, this is a good time to do it, to make sure that the team really understand how much you've appreciated what they've done and what they've committed to this change. It will again make it easier the next change you get. And then monitoring and reviewing. So do we have any questions about any of that? All good?
No questions, Jen. I did pop in the chat the question around how many practices have moved from fault billing to mixed billing or private billing.
Yep.
Recently. Warrigal family have always been mixed billing. I just thought that might have been something that might have started a conversation. There has been that change just recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that's been a really big one. But yeah, I mean, if people have in general been doing mixed billing or private billing, then yeah. So that's one less thing that we all had to worry about as practice managers of private billing practices.
Yeah.
We had other things to concern ourselves with too. All right, so we will have a look at monitoring, reviewing. So congratulations, everyone, you've planned carefully, you've implemented wisely, and the change has now become the new way of doing things. 3 months later, no sign of the new system, as the old ways have just become the status quo once more. What happened? Any ideas? No? All right. So I'm looking at the time. We will go through the why change fails, why this could have happened. So we haven't prepared. We haven't kept an eye on proceedings. So we haven't been monitoring things as they go along. So we don't know what's gone wrong. So we need to put in that system of monitoring and review. We haven't asked for feedback from those concerned. So we don't know if it's working or not, or the communication drops off. We think that it's going well, it's been fine, we've moved on to the next thing. We didn't have any contingency plans in place. So we haven't done our risk management. We didn't have any contingency plans. Something's happened and it's just basically come to a complete stop. When that happens, it becomes too hard for the people that are in the process, and so things revert back to the old way. We haven't allowed enough time for education so that things haven't really cemented themselves to become the normal way of doing things. And when that happens, we revert back. We've let our guard down, and someone who may be that deeply embedded resistance just takes advantage of that and pushes things away from going ahead in the plan. We didn't allocate enough resources. Sometimes change makes more work, doesn't make anything any easier. So people feel there's more work than reward. So why wouldn't they go back to the easier way? Poor timing. Sometimes if we bring in a change when it's really not the greatest time for it. So doing something that is going to be people resource heavy at a time when you know that, planning for that in the time when you know there's always a lot of leave, it's always going to be more difficult to bring that into play. So if you haven't made it clear the why, the what, the where, the when, the who, I've missed one, I think, then you're going to get that backsliding. So it's about monitoring it. So what ways can we monitor and review change? So we can set up KPIs, which is about, so for example, the treatment room billings. So what we would be doing with that is knowing that we normally have 30 dressings a month, and so that's normally what we do. That's great. So we would expect around 30 billings. So the first month we get it, that's great. The second month it drops down to 15. So we look at it and work out whether, so it's not, the KPI is not being met. So we work out why. Has it just been a really good month and people simply haven't injured themselves? Or are the billings getting past the treatment room, not getting to reception, and they're not being, or not getting through back to the doctor and they're not being billed? So setting up KPIs. As we were talking about before, asking for feedback, making sure that we find out as we're going along, what are the problems? Are there any problems? Communicating with our team to make sure that everyone is still on board. There's not particular issues that we need to deal with, because we need to deal with things as they crop up. As we know, if we ignore things, they just get bigger and badder. So dealing with them as they crop up, but making sure that we ask for the feedback so that we're aware of it, and we set some form of KPI so that we know what's going on. If it's online bookings, it's going to be about making sure that everyone has that the bookings, you know, like we expect there to be 200 bookings a month. If it's dropped back to 75 the following month, we need to check and make sure it's not an IT issue. So these are the KPIs that we put in place. And really simply just, you know, electronic calendar, put a reminder in there on the 3rd Wednesday of every month, you're going to check your KPIs, or the 3rd of every week, you're going to check and make sure that everything's ticking along. All right. So finishing it all off, success or failure. Do your research. Is the change necessary or inevitable? If it is, then make sure that you go ahead. But if it's not, then understand why. Look at the risks. That's important, because that's the things that can cause all of our best laid plans to fall astray. Plan everything. You know, if you've got whatever format you do it electronically, if you've got, you know, checklists or spreadsheets, plan everything. People know what they're doing. They know when it has to be done. And then you can mark it off and go, we've moved that far ahead. Prove that the old way is not the best way. Build that compelling case for the new way of doing. Accept there will be resistance. So accept it and deal with it. Draw up that implementation plan. Let everyone know what's going to happen. So even if they're not directly doing the tasks, at least let them be aware of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So they can see that you're moving ahead. They can see what's coming up next. Take away some of that fear. Celebrate the successes. Set up your system of review. And last thing is be patient and tolerant and supportive of yourself and of others. And doing that, and you know what, you are in with a chance. All right, so one last thing that I want you to do, and this is important. What I want you to do, pen and pencil, pen and paper, what I'd like you to do is to sign your name 6 times. Do it. Okay, I want you to do now, swap hands. So sign your name 6 times. It won't be probably as legible as the other one, but do it anyway. 6 times, sign you with your other hand. My dog could have signed this better. Okay, we've done that. Now what I want you to do is to sign your name again 6 times. Okay. So look at what you've just done. So most people will switch back to the comfort hand that last time, even though I didn't tell you to. As far as I know, you were still using the other hand. So you were still on that road with change. So the last take home is, remember, people will try to revert back to what's familiar. So, and what is comfortable, unless they make a conscious effort not to. What you need to do, what your job is, to help them make that conscious effort to move forward, not back. Okay, that's it from me. Any other questions for tonight?
Thanks, Jen. I actually shortened my signature after that.
Yeah. Yeah, mine just, as I said, looked like the dog's done it. But still.
Okay, we've got a thank you. Thank you. It was very helpful. Very good. I also think it's important to do your PDSAs as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
When reviewing, yeah. All right. Well, We don't have any questions that have come through, so I just might take this opportunity to thank you all for attending this evening. We at Gippsland PHN really do appreciate how hard you have worked, especially over the last however long it's been. I'm proud of the ever-changing space that you've been working in, and acknowledge the fact that change was occurring on a daily, if not weekly, if not daily basis. And just, really during COVID, and really proud of the support that you've given to your staff, foremostly, and to the community, keeping everyone safe. So thank you for joining us. You can all go and relax, have your dinner, catch up with whatever you do at the end of the day. Really do appreciate taking time out of your busy day to join us this evening. And we look forward to your feedback. So thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
All right. See you, everybody.